I'd like to bring up Marc Randolph. This guy has been there, done that, not with just Netflix, but with lots of other companies. Marc, all yours.
Well, first of all, thank you, Bud. But mostly thanks to all of you for coming and for giving me such a great excuse to spend some more time in Orlando. I do get here several times a year. I live in Santa Cruz, California. There's one nonstop a day that comes from San Francisco to Orlando, but being the chronic procrastinator that I am, I couldn't get a seat. And I ended up flying here through Dallas. But that's a great thing for me. Because you see, every time I get to fly in or out of Dallas, I get a seat by the window. And on the way in and the way out, I'm looking really carefully, and I'm hoping that on the skyline, I'll be able to pick up this building on the horizon. This is the Renaissance Tower, and for many years the Renaissance Tower was the tallest skyscraper in Dallas. But that's not why I look for it. I look for it because the Renaissance Tower for many years was the headquarters of Blockbuster. And Blockbuster obviously plays a fairly large role in my life. In 2000, when I first intersected with Blockbuster, the companies were on very different trajectories. Netflix was a few years old. We were just about to have our first $3 million year, but we were also on track to lose $30 million. And if those of you can remember the business climate in 2000, that was not a good year where you want to be losing $30 million. So being entrepreneurs, we did the prudent thing, and we explored our options, which is code for how do we get out of this. And we decided that Blockbuster would be a great candidate. But Blockbuster was on a very different trajectory than we were. Blockbuster had 6,000 stores. They had 60,000 employees. They were on track to do $5 billion in sales. We were insignificant to them. So it took us a while to get their attention. But eventually they did call. And as timing would have it, they called when we were on a corporate retreat. We were up in the mountains in this little town called Solvang outside of Santa Barbara. And if you can imagine, Silicon Valley is pretty casual. On this retreat, it's exceptionally casual. I think all I had was a pair of flip-flops. I had some shorts. I had 2 tank top T-shirts. Reed, I think the most formal thing he had was a Hawaiian shirt. And we get the call, and Blockbuster says, "We'd like to see you tomorrow in Dallas." And we go, "Oh, this is, I guess, great. But how do we get from Santa Barbara to Dallas?" And so for the first time ever, we actually rented a jet. And the Netflix trivia here is that the jet belonged to Vanna White. I know, it's crazy. So we pile on the jet. We land in Dallas. We get ushered up to the 25th, 26th floor of this skyscraper here. Huge conference room, all wood paneled. In come the Blockbuster guys in their suits, and we're there. I'm in my shorts, my flip-flops, and Reed's in his Hawaiian shirt. And we make our pitch that wouldn't it be a great marriage to have them buy us, and we would run their online business, and they could run the stores, and we'd find the synergies. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And they thought there was some promise in that, and they said, "Well, how much do you want?" And we kind of screwed up our courage, and we said, $50 million? And you could almost see they were trying to hold it back, and then they couldn't help themselves, and they laughed at us. And the meeting went downhill pretty quickly after that. And worst of all, it was a long, quiet ride back to Santa Barbara. But as I was sitting there in Vanna White's jet, all I could think to myself was, oh, now we're going to have to kick their ass. And you know, it took us 12 years, but we did. We eventually drove them into bankruptcy, and now they're out of business. So I tell this story for a couple of reasons. For one, it's kind of inspiring. It's inspiring that a handful of people with no background in video and just hard work, innovation, and some risk-taking can take down a $5 billion market leader. But on the other hand, there's a different lesson here, which is, what if you're the market leader? Who's coming after you? Who's coming after you with no experience in your business? what do you do then? Well, I think that's what I want to talk about today, is how do you respond to these things? What do you do to innovate yourself? What do you do to disrupt yourself before someone disrupts you? Now, Netflix is perhaps what I might be known for, but Netflix was not my first company. Netflix was actually my 6th company. And since leaving Netflix more than 10 years ago now, I've had a chance to work with scores of early-stage companies and hundreds of young entrepreneurs. I do angel investing. I get to see lots and lots of deals. And through the companies that I've started, the ones I've worked with, the entrepreneurs I've met, I've learned a lot of things, but there's one important thing that if you take away nothing else from today, I want you to take away this. Anyone can do it. Anywhere can do it. Any company can do it. You do not need to be in Silicon Valley. You can be any place. I work with entrepreneurs in Burlington, Vermont, in High Point, North Carolina, in Nashville, Tennessee. I work with entrepreneurs in Guadalajara, Mexico, in Seoul, South Korea, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. You do not need special training. You do not need to have your employees have MBAs or computer science degrees. I mean, it's true. I have one entrepreneur who has a double PhD in math and computer science. But another one of the entrepreneurs I work with dropped out of Columbia as a sophomore, fought forest fires in Montana, drove an ambulance in Los Angeles before he started his first company. Another played in a ska band for 10 years before he started his first company. Another one of them didn't even go to college. Another entrepreneur is only 17. In fact, you don't even need to be particularly smart. Some of the best innovators I know are not the A students, they're the B and C students. So if you don't need these things, what do you need to be more innovative in your company? I think you need 2 things. First, and perhaps most importantly, you need a tolerance for risk. Risk-taking is fundamental to any innovation. And I don't mean scary, dangerous risk. I mean the type of risk that says, I'm going to try something that I don't know where it goes. I'm going to be the kind of person who, when they're traveling, orders the thing off the menu that I have no idea what this tastes like. I'm the person, when they're hiking, who says, I'm not sure where that trail goes, but let's try it. Because most of the time, taking risks is synonymous with innovation. It's trying something you've never tried before without knowing in advance where it goes. But the second thing you need is you need an idea. Ideas are the basis of innovation. But I'm going to point out, it does not need to be a big idea. Mark Zuckerberg just wanted to meet girls when he came up with the idea for Facebook. And Reed and I were just looking for a better way to rent movies when we came up with the idea that became Netflix. And my son was only 8 years old when he started his first company, when he realized the candy bar that he could buy for 10 cents at the grocery store could be sold for $1 the next day at school. And actually, I've told that story before, and it's amazing how many people come up to me afterwards and go, I did that. And it's so much so that I've come to believe that candy arbitrage is some kind of genetic marker for entrepreneurship. It doesn't need to be an original idea. People have been selling books since the printing press, but there was plenty of room for Jeff Bezos to innovate with Amazon. They've been renting cars since the wheel, and we're seeing tremendous things happening in transportation, like Uber and Lyft and relay rides and Getaround, the self-driving car. It doesn't need to be a complex idea. The Post-it note is a piece of paper. But this little piece of paper comes in nearly 70 sizes, 40 colors, 15 or so fragrances. It sells more than $1 billion a year. In fact, I'd argue it doesn't even need to be a good idea. Because after all, what is a good idea? So when I told my wife the idea for what became Netflix, she thought it was the stupidest thing she'd ever heard. But we've all had that experience, haven't we? Where you come out of the shower, you have this brilliant idea, and you can't wait to rush to work and tell your boss. And then what do they say? That'll never work. And then they're helpful, of course, and they give you 10 or 12 reasons why it's so bad. That's not much help. Why is it so hard to tell a good idea from a bad idea? So to help answer that, I want to introduce you to someone. His name is William Goldman. And if you're not familiar with William Goldman, I'm not surprised. He's a Hollywood guy. William Goldman's a Hollywood writer. And if you don't know his name, you probably know his work. He wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, wrote the screenplay for All the President's Men, Marathon Man, won 2 Academy Awards. But the thing that William Goldman's most famous for writing, ironically, is 3 words. What he wrote was, "Nobody knows anything." Nobody knows anything. Now, William Goldman was referring to Hollywood, and in particular, about the fact that you can take A-list actor, you can take the best writer, the best director, but still have no idea how this movie is going to do until after it comes out. You can end up with Heaven's Gate, which cost $50 million to make and grossed, I think, $2 million. But on the other hand, you can take a complete unknown who's never made a movie before and end up with Blair Witch Project, which they did for about $35,000 and has since grossed more than $250 million. Nobody knows anything. Now, it's certainly true in Hollywood, and I'd say it's also true in Silicon Valley. I mentioned before that Netflix is my 6th company, and certainly one of those 6 was very successful. Some were moderately successful, and some not so successful. But if you had asked me on day 1 which would be which, I never could have told you, because nobody knows anything. I alluded to the fact that I was an angel investor. So I'm really well aware of that rule of thumb that says for every 10 investments I make, the odds are good that I'm going to lose all my money on 7, maybe break even on 2, and if I'm lucky, 1 will be a big enough hit to pay off the other 9. But why can't I know in advance? Well, you know, of course. It's because nobody knows anything. So why am I hammering nobody knows anything? Well, it's simple. If no one knows in advance what's going to work, if no one can really tell a good idea from a bad idea until after it's happened, well, what do you have to do? Well, it's simple. The only way to really find out is to do something. You have to do something. There's a famous expression that says no business plan ever survives collision with a customer. And it is so true. You're going to learn more in 1 day of doing something, or making something, or building something, or selling something than in a year of studying it, than in 10 years of management presentations, or PowerPoint slideshows. You have to take the risk and try it. But it all has to start with an idea. And let's talk for a second about where ideas come from. People get stuck on this. They go, I want to innovate, but what do I do? Well, there's some classic ways that people in Silicon Valley look for ideas. They can look for new technologies, mobile, the Internet of Things, all things that are beginning to wash over your industry. You can look at current trends, healthcare, education. You can look at new business models and apply them to old problems. But by far, the easiest way to find ideas is one thing that every single person in this room can do, and it's look for pain. You train yourself to see the world as an imperfect place. You begin to find all those flaws, those things that annoy you, that make your job harder. And once you get good at that, they're all around you. And I'm encouraging you not just to find things that are wrong. Everyone can say, well, look at this problem we're having in sub-Saharan Africa, or we're having this problem in the Middle East. Look for things that you know well. Look at your jobs. Look at the things you do every day. There are plenty of things that are broken all around us. Now, the best way I think to illustrate what I mean by using pain as a way of generating ideas is I'm going to talk a little bit about a job that I had. And it's a job that I had many years ago when I used to paint houses. This is my college summer job. Now, this was a long time ago, nearly 40 years ago, and the world was a very, very different place. Obviously, there was no internet, there were no personal computers, there was no cell phones, there was no streaming video. It was a dark time. And way back, 40 years ago, when they sold paint, they used to sell it in containers that looked like this. I know, it's frightening. So imagine my surprise when this last summer I went to paint my daughter's bedroom, and I went to buy paint. And it's a different world now. They sell paint in a container that looks like this one. Now, is that because this is the Ne Plus Ultra of paint containers? Well, I hope not. It's a deeply flawed product. And anyone here who has painted before knows exactly what I'm talking about. So let's talk about the process. So to start, this is a consumer product which requires that to open it, you get a screwdriver. Okay, I'll get past that. I'll go find a screwdriver to pry the lid off my can of paint. Now my can of paint has this lid which is all wet with paint, and I've got to find it and put it down someplace where I'm not going to step in it later, off the side. Fine. Now I've got to stir the paint. Now, how do you stir the paint? Well, luckily they've invented a pretty fancy product to stir the paint with. It's called a stick. So you take your stick and you put it in the paint. It does a pretty good job of stirring the paint. But now you've got a stick covered with paint. But wait, we've all figured out that way to get the paint off the stick. And you just kind of put it in the thing and pull it back on one side to scrape the paint. But now you have a stick dry on one side and wet in the other. So what do? You flip the stick over and put it back in the paint. And pull it out, and now it's only wet 2/3 of the way. You do that 7 or 8 times. Now you have a wet stick, you put that with the lid and hope you don't step in it. Now you've got to pour the paint. So you can see it has the easy pour spout. And you begin pouring it into your tray, which I won't even talk about using the tray. The paint fills up that little rim that the lid sits in. More on that later. So now we're done. And I've always found it kind of interesting that to take the lid off, I use a screwdriver. So to put the lid on, a hammer. So I get my hammer, and I get my lid, and I put it back on, and I give it a few good whacks with the hammer. But of course, I forgot about the paint, which had slowly filled up the rim around the can, which sprays all over my floor and my legs and the wall. So you can see this was not a good process. And I'm not telling you this to tell you about my woe as a painter. I'm telling you because I hope that as I told this story, you were thinking to yourself, and you were saying, well, why don't they sell paint in something different? I don't know, maybe a milk carton? Or why don't they sell it in those nice plastic ones that laundry detergent comes in, which can recover the spill back into the bottle? Or why don't they sell it with some kind of lid you can buy with an embedded spout in it that you can place back on and reuse? Or why isn't there some kind of embedded stirrer? Why don't they? Why isn't there? Why can't they? Lots of ideas should be flowing into your head when you hear about something so bad as painting. And that's the kind of thing that you need to do all the time in your day job, in your home life. As you're saying, how do I change things? You've got to start by looking for the things that aren't working well, because that's what leads to ways to improve them. Contrary to popular belief, ideas rarely spring fully formed into your head in some kind of eureka moment. You have to look for them. You have to dig. Like the idea for Netflix, for example, did not come from some moment of anguish over some mythical late fee on a movie. We were looking for that idea. It was buried in a big pile of bad ideas, and we did not find that idea in a video store. That idea we found while we were carpooling. Now, this story goes back a little bit further, back to 1995. When 2 friends and I had started a very, very small software company. And 6 months later, we had about 9 employees, and something great happened, which is our little software company was purchased by a bigger software company. And that was a great outcome for us, great outcome for our investors, and we all went and worked for this bigger software company. And this bigger software company happened to be founded and run by a gentleman named Reed Hastings. So I went and worked directly for Reed. And we worked side by side for maybe 6 or 9 months. And then something great happened again. An even bigger software company bought the new company. And we said, this is fantastic. This is a great outcome for us. It's a great outcome for our investors. But then the best thing of all happened, which is I got fired. But it's a great thing, because I got fired in that wonderful Silicon Valley golden handcuffs kind of way, where they say, Mark, in this combined entity, we're not going to quite need your further services, or however they try and couch that politely to say you're fired, but we need you to stick around for 6 months. There might be questions. and we have to find a document. So we want you to stay. You're not going to have anything to do. You just got to come to work every day for maybe 6 months, and then we'll keep paying you, we'll vest your shares, we'll give you a big bonus at the end. And I said, where do I sign up for that? And I realized, this is great. I'm going to start another company. And I'm going to be able to come to work every day, have a big office, have a whiteboard, have a fast internet connection, have a telephone, have office supplies, and time. Now, Reed was in the same boat as I. He was being made redundant. And he said the next phase of his career is he wants to become a philanthropist and try and change the world of education. But he wanted to kind of keep his hand in a little bit. Once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. So we agreed that we would start a company, that he would be the initial angel investor, he'd join the board, I'd start the company, and off we'd go. But we needed an idea, and here's how that worked. So Reed and I both live in a little town called Santa Cruz, California, on the coast. And every day, Reed would pick me up in his car, and we'd commute the 45 to 50 minutes over the mountains to Sunnyvale, where the office was. And on the way there, we'd brainstorm ideas. We'd look at new business models, we'd look at innovations, we'd look at trends, and of course, we'd look for pain. And then I'd get to the office, and I'd go in and use my fast internet connection and my phone and my whiteboard, and I'd research these ideas. And at the end of the day, I'd get back in the car, and we'd drive back, and I'd brief Reed on what I discovered. And we did this for months. Hundreds of ideas. Some good, and some not so good. But one of the interesting things we noticed was that the half-life of an idea was 24 hours. And for those of you who were asleep in physics class, what I mean by half-life of an idea being 24 hours is this, that if you started out on Monday morning and you had 16 bright and shiny ideas all full of promise, that it turned out after only 1 day of research that about half of them weren't really very good, and you were down to 8. By Wednesday, you were probably down to 4. Thursday, maybe 2. And if you were lucky, by the end of the week, you had 1 idea which still showed enough promise you'd want to keep working on it. Now, one of the ideas that came up in this process was, let's do video rental by mail. $8 billion category, possibly could make this work. And I researched it, and it was a bad idea. Back then, in those dark ages, video came on those big video cassettes. They were expensive, they were heavy, and a little bit of research said this is never going to happen, and we abandoned it. Until a few months later, when a friend told Reed about this new technology called DVD. And DVD was a small little piece of plastic the size of a music CD. And Reed and I realized, something that small and that light might be able to be shipped a totally different way. So we turned the car around and drove to downtown Santa Cruz, went to a used record store and bought a used music CD, went next door to a stationery store and bought a little gift envelope, put the CD in the envelope, addressed it to Reed, went up the steps to the Santa Cruz post office, dropped it in the slot, and sent it off. And the very next morning, when Reed came to pick me up, he had the envelope in his hand. 1 day, unbroken, 1 stamp. And that was the moment where we said, this idea just might work. And that kicked us into a whole different phase. It was a validation phase. From here, I was trying to really figure out if this thing was real. How many DVD players were there? What would it cost me to build a website? How many titles had been released? How does this industry even work? But of course, I could not answer the most fundamental question of all, which is, how is a DVD rental by mail using DVDs actually going to perform? There was certainly no other company I could look at and see how well they had done. It was a completely blank slate. And no matter how much I researched, there was no way to establish with any degree of certainty at all that it's going to work. This happens so frequently, any place innovation is taking place, that we actually have a word for what it is you have to do when you reach that point where there's nothing more to learn, where you're faced with contradictory, inconclusive, and totally unreadable information. And we have a phrase for it, and the phrase is, you've just got to do it. Well, we actually throw in a modifier after just, but you get the idea. You have to just do it. There's no way to find out whether it works without trying it. And so we did. Reed wrote a check for $2 million. We hired a dozen people. We got a small office in Scotts Valley, California, put our heads down, and 6 months later had a simple website that rented DVDs by mail. Now, the Netflix back then bore very little resemblance to the Netflix you know now. I mean, for one, it's DVD only, no streaming, just discs. Number two, it was due dates and late fees. There was nothing innovative about this model whatsoever, except for the fact you didn't need to go to a store. But you had to rent it from us, we'd mail it out, you had to return it to us within a certain number of days, there was late fees, standard model. But perhaps kind of the most surprising thing to people is not only did we rent DVDs, we sold DVDs. In fact, we sold a lot of DVDs. And by the end of that first summer in business, I would say 95+% of our revenue was from selling DVDs. And this was not a good thing, because we knew it was just a matter of time, this being a commodity, that Amazon would begin selling DVDs, and then Kmart, and then Walmart, and then 7-Eleven, and pretty soon margins go to zero, no differentiation, and we're out of business. Now, rental, there was a good business, highly differentiated, lots of infrastructure requirements. We really could build a defensible business with potential margin. The problem is customers hated it. Nobody wanted to rent from us. We tried really hard, couldn't get a single person to do it more than once. Worst of all, doing both at the same time was proving to be very problematic. I mean, you think about it. Some of our titles you could rent, other ones you could sell, some you could do both. When people came to the home page, we had to explain, oh no, we sell DVDs, oh, but we also rent them, and here's how this works. The checkout flow, how to accommodate people who wanted to rent and buy or both, the warehouse. And we said, if we're going to be successful as a company, we've got to pick one of these things and do it really well. But which one? Do you pick sales, which is going to be a great business for 3 or 4 years until all of a sudden it's not? Or do we bet everything on rental, which has potential to be a huge disruptive business in a huge category, but we have zero indication that customers want to do it? And this is the challenge of innovation, is how do you make that bet? How do you decide to go for the long shot with huge potential return, or stick with the safe thing, which slowly but surely is going to go out of business? And as a young entrepreneur, that was the hardest decision I had to make. And eventually we did decide to go for rental only, to walk entirely away from sales and bet everything we had on figuring out how to get rental to work. Now, I'll take this opportunity to point out that when you walk away from 95% of your revenue, it has a certain way of focusing your mind. And from that point forward, we were so committed to making this company successful. We tried everything. We tried punch cards. We tried buy one, get one free. We tried promotional tie-ins. We tried hundreds of ideas, and we were looking for this proverbial needle in a haystack. What was the one thing that would eventually catch on? And at first, when we had new innovations to try, we'd polish them up. We'd make them perfect. We'd check the spelling. We'd obsess about what the images were. We'd make sure there was no bugs. We'd fully build out the feature set. But unfortunately, doing it that way was slow. Maybe one new innovation every 3 or 4 weeks. But worse, we realized that almost all that time polishing it up was wasting time, because we were almost always polishing the wrong thing. Because customers continually surprised us about what they liked, what they used, what they tried. And we realized that if it was a good idea, it would shine through no matter how poorly implemented it was. And if it was a bad idea, it wouldn't work no matter how well we polished it up. And eventually we began going faster and faster and faster, and the faster we went, the more we learned. And the lesson we took away is that the key to innovation is not about having good ideas. It's about building a system to try lots of bad ones. It's a volumes game. So if you really want to understand how Silicon Valley innovates so quickly, it's simple. They've just built a system that makes them great at trying lots of bad ideas. And there's a name for companies who are great at trying lots of bad ideas. They're called startups. Now, there's a classic definition of a startup, which is a group formed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. All it's doing is trying to discover it. It's trying one idea after another. It's innovating as rapidly as it can, hoping that one of these things will take off. And they have a technique they use to be able to go so quickly, and it's called a minimal viable product. You've also probably heard of this one. And a minimal viable product is an early version of a product which has a minimal feature set to allow you to figure out whether it works or not. But I believe that if you're building minimal viable products, you're building too much. I believe the key to innovation, and not just in Silicon Valley, but any place, is to figure out how to test your ideas without building them at all. How do you fake it? How do you figure out if your idea is a good one without actually doing it? And I call this validation hacking. Now, it's kind of a strange concept to say, how do you test something without doing it? And let me explain what I mean. And I'm going to use what I call a concept hack. And it's a young entrepreneur that I know who started a company called Easy Fridge. And he was young, he's probably in his late 20s, lives in San Francisco. He was at a party late one Friday night up in Soma district of San Francisco. And as often happens with 20-something parties, it got to be about 1 o'clock in the morning, and they ran out of beer. And they all began bickering about whose turn it was to go out and find an open liquor store and do the beer run to bring back to the party. And there's some pain for you. And he said, wouldn't it be great? I have my cell phone, it knows where I am, it knows my preferences, it has my credit card store, it can figure out where the open liquor stores are. Why can't I just press a button and then someone delivers beer to me? Okay, not a bad idea. But the old way of doing that was you'd do a big PowerPoint slideshow and you'd go and raise tens of millions of dollars and you'd build this all out and then you'd try it and see if it worked or not. Then the more progressive way is you'd build a version of a minimal viable product where you built that software, very limited features, and see if it worked. But what he did is began to think, what am I really curious about? Do I think, can a cell phone really know where I am? Well, of course a cell phone can know where. That's been proven many times. Is he really wondering, will someone be confident enough to store their credit card? No, that's been solved years ago as well. Can it figure out where the open liquor stores are? No, that's easy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. His real question was, will anyone do this? And if they do it, how concentrated a time period is the ordering? How big is the average order size? What does the repeat business look like? And he said, is there a way for me to test that without raising money, without building an app, without writing a line of code? And here's what he did. He went and printed up business cards. And the business cards simply said, need beer? Call me. And put his phone number on it. And he went and stood outside a building on Friday night in Soma. And whenever someone who looked like his demographic came in, he gave him the card and said, hey, you need beer? Call me. And then he went and waited. And then midnight, people would call him. And he'd take the call, he'd get in his bike, he'd go to the liquor store, he'd buy their order, he'd bring it back, go up in the elevator, and deliver the beer. And he learned something important without writing a line of code. He learned it was a bad idea. He learned the orders were all Friday and Saturday. They were all 11 p.m. to 2 in the morning. They were all small. There was very little repeat business. But something interesting happened in that process. One of the people he was delivering to said, this is kind of a neat idea, but you know, I work delivering all the wine and the beer for our office parties. So 2 days a week, I'm lugging cases of beer up the stairs. Maybe you'd do this for offices. So he changed the whole business, but did it the same way. Need things delivered? Call me. And he realized that doesn't work. And one of the people in that business said, you know, this is kind of cool you're delivering to offices, but I wish you could stock my fridge for me. And lo and behold, that one worked. And he began to learn the dynamics and how it behaved. And based on that, he was able to raise money, build the app, do the marketing, and start the company. But he did that after he'd validated whether his idea was a good one without wasting the time and the money of actually doing it. Let me give you one more quick example. This is another way of doing the exact same type of validation hacking. These are called website hacks. And I'm going to briefly introduce you to 3 companies that have done this pretty well. So Outvoicer factors receivables on the web. People give them your invoices. They pay you, then they go collect, and it's all kind of done automatically. Some Lycée is customized shampoo. You mail them a lock of your hair. They analyze it. They formulate a shampoo for you. It's all subscription. Third company is Jarvis, which is an SMS-based personal assistant. You text it what it wants, and it does it for you. OK. You know, I hear lots of ideas. There's 3 of them, 3 companies. But those 3 companies have something very important in common. What they have in common is that these 3 companies don't exist, and they never did. The only existence of these companies were those websites you saw. All 3 of those were done by one pair of entrepreneurs. Each of them took a week, 1 or 2 days to build that website, 1 or 2 days to drive traffic to the website and see how customers behaved. Because, for example, for some Lycée, they weren't wondering, will we be able to formulate custom shampoo? They knew they could do that. They knew they could do all the e-commerce pieces. But they wanted to know, would customers care? And this was a way to find that out without actually starting the company. And these techniques are ones that anybody can do. And I'm not saying you have to build websites or you have to stand outside your customers with business cards. I'm saying you want to think, is there a way I can try my idea without having to go through this whole process of getting it funded and built and approved? How can I just try it? How can I test it? How can I get it in front of a real person and see if they like it? Now, Netflix had its own share of these validation hacks. And at one point, this is in 1999, we were kind of down to the wire, running out of ideas, running out of time, running out of money. And we had 3 things left we wanted to try. The first was getting rid of due dates and late fees. We said, we have big warehouses full of DVDs. And we're saying, why are we storing these DVDs? Why can't we store them at the customers? Let them keep it. And when they want a new one, they mail the old one back and we replace it. Let's test that. We also said it's kind of crazy that whenever they return a DVD, we've got to make them come back and pick the next one. Let's let them build a list in advance of all the movies that they want to see. When one comes in, next one goes out. Another cool idea to try. And the third thing was subscription. Why bother charging them each time? Let's try a monthly fee and see how that works. So we bundled up all 3 of these ideas in one package. We tested it, and lo and behold, it changed everything. Customers loved it. 90% of the people who tried it let us hit their credit card at the end of the month. Attrition from that point on was less than 1% a month. We began attracting new people. The business took off. And that marked the moment where Netflix stopped being a startup and became a real company. But it all kind of started when we had no idea where we were going. And that was on April 14th, 1997, which was day 1 for Netflix. And I can remember so distinctly exactly where I was on that day. And it was because we were in our small office in Scotts Valley, and we had worked for 6 months in launching this company. And our CTO had rigged up a monitor at one end of a conference table, and he'd set it up so that once we went live, a bell would ring every time an order came in. And the other side of the room, we had a big table set up, and we had champagne ready to pop open, and champagne glasses, and we were all ready to see what happened. And we had an office pool to bet on how many orders we would take that first day. And it got to be the hour of 9 o'clock, and as the time ticked over, our CTO leaned forward and hit a few keys, and we were live. We all kind of stood around expectantly, waiting for something to happen, and then, ding, our first order, and we all cheered and went over and cracked open the champagne and began pouring it, and then, ding, ding, 2 more orders, and we all cheered again, and then only a fraction of a second later, ding, 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 and then dead quiet. And we had crashed our servers in the first 3 minutes of the company. So when I think back on what was I doing on that first day, it was not sitting there with a glass of champagne in my hand, toasting my success as an entrepreneur. I was at the aisles of Fry's Electronics, pushing the shopping cart, while our CTO was throwing in all the components we would use to limp our servers along that first day to try and keep us open. But at the end of that first day, the winner was 100 orders. 100 orders. Oh my God, I could not believe that we had done so well. But just a few years later, we had 150,000 subscribers. Again, I could not believe it. And now, we have more than 60 million subscribers in countries all over the world. It is astounding to me. When I said earlier that you have no idea when you start with an idea what's going to become of it, it is completely sincere. I am as shocked or more shocked than anybody at the success that Netflix has seen. It's a tremendous thing. And people come up to me all the time and say, gosh, Mark, you must be so proud of what you've done for Netflix. And of course I'm proud, because you're always proud of something you've created, but I'm never sure what to be proud of. Was I smart? And no. I mean, as I hope you've picked up, 99 out of 100 of my ideas were bad ones. Was it that I'm persistent? Well, I do take a little bit of pride in persistence. And I actually put a very big stock in persistence. And I want to introduce you to one more person who I think expresses it pretty well. And it's a woman named Mary Pickford. And Mary Pickford is also a Hollywood personality. She's from a different era. She's a silent film star. And I think one of her claims to fame is that in 1904, I think it was, she appeared in 51 movies in 1 year, almost a movie a week. She was considered America's sweetheart, even though she was Canadian. But she said is this. She goes, this thing we call failure is not the falling down, but it's the staying down. And risk-taking involves a lot of falling down. And innovation requires a lot of falling down. But you've got to pick yourself up. So if I am proud of something else, it's that. I got knocked down a lot, sometimes for just a little bit, sometimes for a long time. But I always got back up. And the third thing that I'm proud of is my optimism. I am an optimist, but I'm not like a glass half full optimist. I'm a glasses overflowing optimist. I talked earlier about the fact that I do angel investing, and the truth is I'm a terrible angel investor. And I shouldn't be. I've got a really good sense of the deals and the technology and the entrepreneurs, and I can kind of smell that something's wrong, but I can't help myself. I'm a believer. And I find myself sitting there, and then I lean back in my chair, and before I can help myself, I've grabbed the whiteboard marker. I'm going, this just might work. I like every idea that I hear. So I think earlier when I said that there was 2 things you needed to do to be able to innovate effectively, I was wrong. There was 3. Yes, you definitely need to have a tolerance for risk. And risk-taking is cultural. It's not just you having a tolerance for risk. It's you having your company have a tolerance for risk. It's you endowing your employees with a tolerance for risk. Everyone has to be willing to accept a failure so that you try new things. You definitely have to have ideas, not just one idea, because as I said, you're never going to know it's a good idea until you try it. So you need hundreds of ideas to churn through them, to find the one that's going to make the huge difference. But the biggest thing you need is you need confidence. You've got to believe this is going to work. Earlier when I was talking about how your friends, your family, your boss, they're all saying, that'll never work. Well, the unfortunate reality is most of the time they're going to be right. But you've got to believe, not this time. Someone's going to be successful with this idea. And it's going to be me. I can do this. And as I said before, you guys can do this. I am not special. Most of you are smarter than me. Most of you are harder working. You're certainly better prepared than I was. You can really make change happen by taking small steps and being persistent and taking these risks and being confident. So I think what I'd like to do is close by introducing you to one last person, a gentleman named Nolan Bushnell, probably the best known of the three. Nolan Bushnell is perhaps best known as being the father of the video game industry. He was the founder of a company called Atari. Also was the founder, maybe not so famously, of the Chuck E. Cheese pizza. Inventor of the headache, I think, something like that. But he also started 20 or so other companies, chronic entrepreneur. But what Nolan said, which I thought was so interesting, was this. Everyone who's ever taken a shower has had an idea. But it's the person who gets out of the shower, dries off, and does something about it that makes the difference. So the next time you have an idea, don't let it die there. Don't have it be one of those things where 5 years later you said, oh, I had that idea that someone else did. Get out of the shower, dry off, and do something about it. And if everyone else is telling you how bad that idea is, well, you can always call me because you know that I'm going to like it. Thank you very much.